How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 10 of Masechta Horayos. Oh, okay. Well, Chaver, we just started Masechta Horayos and we're almost at the end. What a difficult Masechta. What a small, mighty Masechta. Anyways, today we begin the third parak of Masechta Horayos. And the parak starts off talking about Kohen gadols and kings who are no longer serving. Okay, so they were Kohen gadol, they were king. Now they are no longer in that role. So how does that affect their korbanos? Of course, a king brings a sa'ir nasi, a Kohen gadol brings a par Kohen Mashiach. What happens when they are no longer in their role? We then discuss in a subsequent Mishnah, Kohen gadols and kings who are not yet serving. So what if you have somebody who, let's say, ate chaylev by accident, and then they become the Kohen gadol or the nasi? Do they bring a korban or not? And then, interesting agadata. We get to some interesting agadata. I think it comes up maybe tomorrow as well. We get a little bit of interesting agadata today. A little bit of interesting agadata. So, Chaver, that's what we have in store for us over the next hour or so. So, let us jump in and enjoy ourselves. Okay, friends, we begin. And Daf Tes Amud Beis at the new parak, at the new Mishnah. Kohen Mashiach Shechoto Ve'achar kach over mi meshichuso. So if you have a Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol decided that a certain type of chaylev was permitted, he ate the chaylev, now he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, for whatever reason. Similarly, a nasi, a king, who sinned and needs to bring a sa'ir nasi, but now he's no longer the king. Kohen Mashiach Mevi par ve'anosi mevi sa'ir. The halacha is that even though the Kohen Gadol is no longer Kohen Gadol and the king is no longer king, but they sinned when they were in their respective roles, they bring their respective korbanos. The Kohen Gadol would bring a par Kohen Mashiach, and the nasi would bring the sa'ir nasi. Mashiach she'ovar what if they sinned already once they were no longer in their roles? What do you say? What do you say? You have somebody who was the Kohen Gadol, no longer the Kohen Gadol. Was the Nasi, no longer the Nasi, and then they sin. While they're no longer in their respective roles, they're just regular citizens. And then they sin. They accidentally eat chaylev, whatever. Chaylev, what do you say? Kohen Mashiach mevipar v'anosiv kehedjed. Very interesting. So the nasi, the king, excuse me, the king, excuse me, the king is just a regular citizen. The king is no longer a king, and he accidentally eats chaylev, so he brings a korban chatas, just like any other regular Joe, just like any other Tom, Dick, or Harry. The Kohen Gadol, however, the ex-Kohen Gadol, even if he sins post-Kohen Gadol, he still brings the par Kohen Mashiach. So now the Gemara asks an interesting kasha. Hashe yishlomer over mi meshichuso v'achar kach choto mevi par choto v'achar kach over mi meshichuso etzricha lemeimar. So the Gemara asks an interesting kasha. Arguably, an arguably interesting kasha. I find it interesting. And I hope that you will too. How's that? Which is that if you think about it, we said by the Kohen Gadol that even if he sins when he's just a regular citizen, he's no longer Kohen Gadol, and he sins as a regular person, and still he brings the par Kohen Mashiach. Well, then certainly, if he sins while he's still the Kohen Gadol, and then he hadn't yet brought his korban, and now he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, certainly he should bring a par Kohen Mashiach. But if he initiated the sin when he was when he was just a regular person, he still brings the par Kohen Mashiach, since he was once the Kohen Gadol. If he sinned when he was the Kohen Gadol, and now he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, of course he should bring the par and the par Kohen Mashiach. Well, it's a good question, right? Again, even if he sinned when he was no longer the Kohen Gadol, just a regular guy, maybe par, he still brings his par Kohen Mashiach. So chata, if he sinned while he was still the Kohen Gadol, and only later on became a regular guy, obviously he's going to bring a par Kohen Mashiach, mishum the katani gabi nasi. This is a little tricky. You have to read into this one a little, just slightly. Well, mishum the katani gabi nasi, the thing is, it's for consistency with the nasi, because the nasi is a different halacha. The nasi, if he sins when he's no longer the nasi, he sins when he's no longer the nasi, so he just brings a korban like everybody else, a korban chatas. So by the nasi, we had to say that, but if he sins while he's still the nasi, and then is no longer the nasi, he would still bring the sa'ir nasi. So because we had to teach that halacha for nasi, we also taught it with regard to the Kohen Mashiach, even though you're right, technically we wouldn't have had to have taught it for the Kohen Mashiach, since you're right, even if he sins when he's no longer the Kohen Mashiach, he still brings the par Kohen Mashiach. So says the Gemara, good, very good diuk, very sharp, but there's a reason for it. So again, Mishum de katoni gabe nasi, because we had to write, well, because it taught in the Mishnah by the nasi, that if he is no longer the, did I say navi? If I did, I meant to say nasi. That if he sins when he's no longer the nasi, kihejet maisi, so he brings just a regular korban, and therefore we had to say that, but if he sins while he's still the nasi, and then now he's no longer the nasi, he does bring the sa'ir nasi. So tani, so ahochi tani gab Mashiach. So that is why we also taught by the Kohen Mashiach that chotav achar kach over, that if he sinned while he was still the Kohen Mashiach and now he's no longer the Kohen Mashiach, maybe Pari brings the par Kohen Mashiach. But you're right, technically we didn't need to teach that, because he even brings the par Kohen Mashiach if he sins when he's no longer even the Kohen Gadol. Mina and Emili, how do we know this? Know what? I don't remember, but we'll find out in a second. The Tana Rabbanan, the Rabbi taught v'hikriv al chataso, that he teaches on his sin. I think that this was right. Melamed shemevi chataso misha'over. Yeah, there you go. That right. So this is by the par Kohen Mashiach. Okay, it says in the pasuk. I'm reading the pasuk. V'im Kohen HaMashiach yechta lashma sa'am v'hikriv al chataso asher chata pai ben bakar tam l'shem chatas. We want to learn from v'hikriv al chataso that he brings his par Kohen Mashiach even if the sin is post being the Kohen Gadol. Again, how do we know that the Kohen Gadol brings a par Kohen Mashiach even when he sins post being Kohen Gadol? And the Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught v'hikriv al chatasu melamed shemevi chatasu mishaver, that he brings is special korban chatas, is par korban Mashiach, even if the sin is when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol. Sheyachol valodinhu, I may have said, well, let's use our noggins. Uman nasi shemevi b'shigigas ma'aseh. This I think is actually going to come. Yeah, this I believe is going to come up actually in the next chunk of today's daf. So let's just set this. So let's just go over this. Let's just get this logic in order so that we can work with it over the next few minutes. So we've seen this before, that the nasi, the king, brings his sa'ir nasi for shigigas maise, even without hel and dover in shigigas maise, even just for shigigas maise, right? He thought he was eating shuman, he ate chelev. The king brings a sa'ir nasi. However, in that same scenario, the Kohen Gadol would not bring a par Kohen Mashiach. He only brings the par Kohen Mashiach for hel and dover in shigigas maise. For shigigas maise alone, he would bring Nothing. So therefore, I may have thought to say that if when it comes to the Sa'ir Nasi, if when it comes to the king, who brings more korbanos, he brings his Sa'ir Nasi even for Shigigas Maise alone. And yet, when he's no longer king, he doesn't bring his Sa'ir Nasi. Brings just a regular korban. So I may have thought to say that a Kohen Mashiach, who brings less korbanos to begin with, right? Is the par Kohen Mashiach is only by Helim Dovrim Shigigas Maise. So certainly I would think when he's no longer Kohen Gadol, he would not bring the par Helim, the par Kohen Mashiach, right? Anyways, to begin with, the par Helim Mashiach, the par Kohen Mashiach is in a more limited capacity. It's only Helim Dovrim Shigigas Maise. So certainly it would not be offered when he's no longer Kohen Gadol, right? So let's read it inside. Valodinu. I would use my noggin. Uman nosi shemevi b'shigas maise ein mevi chatos mishaovar. A kohen, a nosi who brings the sa'ir nosi even just for shigas maise, and yet when he's no longer nosi, he doesn't bring his sa'ir nosi anymore. Just brings a regular korban chatos. Moshiach she'ein mevi b'shigas maise ela helem dovrim shigas maise. The Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Mashiach, who only brings his par Kohen Mashiach specifically by Helim Dovrim Shigigas Maise, well then, lo kol shekain, certainly then, I would say that when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, he does not bring his par Kohen Mashiach, he would just bring a regular korban like everybody else. So Talmud Omar, Vekriv al chatoso melamed, shemebi al chatoso mishe over. So it teaches that, nonetheless, Vikriv al-Chatasu teaches that by a Kohen Gadol, he brings the par Kohen Mashiach even if he sins when he's no longer Kohen Gadol. We need a special pasuk to teach us that. But now the Gemara says, okay, fine. So now let's plug it back. Okay, now that we've established, based on a pasuk, that by the Kohen Gadol, he brings his par Kohen Mashiach, even if he sins when he's no longer Kohen Gadol. Well, now let's try to plug that back in then and go back in and say that certainly by a sa'ir, by a nasi, he should bring his sa'ir nasi when he sins when he's no longer the king, because, right, from that same logic. V'naisi nami nasi mikal v'chomer. Well, now let's plug it back into the nasi using our noggins. Moshiach she'ein mevi b'shigigas maise mevi chatos misha'over. If a Kohen Mashiach, who does not bring a par Kohen Mashiach for Shigigas Maise, only for Helim Dovrim Shigigas Maise, and yet he still continues to bring his par Kohen Mashiach even when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, when he sins when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol. So Nasi Shemivi Chatos b'Shigigas Maise, or Nasi who even brings the Sa'ir Nasi for just Shigigas Maise, and Udin Shemevi Chatos Mishaover, certainly then he should bring the Sa'ir Nasi even when he's no longer the king. So Talmud Omar, Asher Nasi Yechta Kshu Nasi in Kshu Hejit Lo. The pasuk says Asher Nasi Yechta. When the king sins, he brings a Sa'ir Nasi when he's the king. But if he's not the king, then no. If he's no longer the king, he does not bring the Sa'ir Nasi, just a regular korban chatas, just like everybody else. And now we get up to the next part of today's daf, the next Mishnah, the next section of today's daf, Kohen gadols and kings who are not yet serving. This is a machlokas between the Chacham and Reb Shimon that we've already seen from, I don't remember, earlier on in the Masechta, maybe already daf Gimel. I believe this is daf Gimel. Yeah, Reb Shimon, Reb Pluto, Reb Shimon, Rabbanan on daf Gimel already. We saw this. Maybe we've seen it subsequently as well. Machlokas between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim about what happens if somebody sins when they're just a regular Joe, just a regular guy, a regular citizen, and then they become the Kohen Gadol or the king. What happens in terms of their korban? They haven't yet offered the korban. What do they do? So, says the Mishnah, Chatu ad shelo nismanu v'achar kach nismanu. Okay, so if they accidentally ate chaylev, when they were just regular people like you and me, And then they became king, Kohen Gadol. Hari'elu ke'ajotis. So, says the Chachamim, that they bring their regular korban chatas. They sinned when they were a regular person. That's when they had the chiyuv to bring a korban chatas. Now they became the Kohen Gadol, they became the king. They still have this chiyuv korban chatas that they have this korban chatas that they haven't yet offered. So they'll offer that korban chatas now, but just the regular korban chatas that they were chayiv initially. Reb Shimon says, Im noda loim ad shelo nismanu chayovim u'mishenismanu pturim. So Reb Shimon's opinion is that it depends. Okay, so they sinned before they got their new role. If in addition to sinning, they also were aware of their sin, and then they were appointed to the new role, when already aware of their sin and already aware that they are chayiv a korban chatas, so then they offer the korban chatas. I believe a regular korban chatas. If they only became aware, let's say they ate shuman and now they got their new role, Kohen Gadol, king, whatever, and someone says, oh, by the way, that shuman that you ate was actually chelev. So, which means at the time that they were appointed to their role, they did not know about it yet, that they had a chiyuv korban. So says Reb Shimon, they would be potter. So again, let's read this inside. I'm going to start again from the beginning of the Mishnah. If they sinned before they were appointed to the new role, then they were appointed to the new role, now they're the king, now the Kohen Gadol. According to Tanakame, they bring their regular korban chatas that they were chayiv initially. Reb Shimon Omer, says Reb Shimon, if they became aware of the fact that they need to bring of the chiyuv korban chatas prior to their appointment, well then chayavim. Well, then they bring, I believe, just a regular korban chatas. Does Rashi? What is? No, okay. I assume it's a regular korban chatas. But if they only find out after they've been appointed to their new roles, pturim, they do not need to bring a korban chatas. They're completely potter if they found out after their appointment. Ezu nasi. What is this nasi that we're talking about? Zeh melech, the king. Shnemar, we call mitzvahs Hashem Eloi Kob. It says by the nasi, by the pasuk, by the soy nasi. It says, I'm reading the pasuk now. Asher nasi yechto ve'osa achas we call mitzvahs Hashem Eloi Kob. Now says the Mishnah, she'ein al gabav ela Hashem Eloi Kob. We're talking about somebody who there is nobody above him, only the Rabbeinu Shalom, and that is the king. The king is the highest, is the highest position. Says the Gemara Menonimili. How do we know that the Kohen Mashiach is only going to offer the par Kohen Mashiach once, if he sins, post his appointment, not prior? If the Kohen Gadol sins, to the exclusion of prior sins. Prior sins would not be with the par Kohen Mashiach. It would be, let's say, according to the Chacham, it would be just a regular korban chatas. Valo dinu. I mean, according to Reb Shimon also, probably he would also require a idea. But anyways, you're not going to offer a par Kohen Mashiach from a prior sin. Valo dinu. In fact, why do I need the pasuk of Ima Kohen HaMashiach Yechta? Can I just use my noggin? Uma nosi shemevi b'shikigas ma'ase ein mevi ala kodmis. Well, if a king, Vanosi, who brings the Sa'ir Nasi, even for Shikigas Maisa alone, not just Helem Dovrim Shikigas Maisa, like the Kohen Gadol, but even for just Shikigas Maisa alone, he brings a Sa'ir Nasi, and yet he doesn't bring his Sa'ir Nasi for prior Averis. Ein Mevi ala Kodmis Mashiach, she'ein Mevi Elo al Helen Dovrim Shigas Maise. The Kohen Gadol, who to begin with, his korban is more limited, the par Kohen Mashiach, that it's only offered for Helen Dovrim Shigas Maise. Einu din shelo yovi ala Kodmis. Certainly then, if the king doesn't bring for Kodmis, for prior Averis, then certainly the Kohen Mashiach will not be bringing a par Kohen Mashiach for prior violations, for prior averos. To which the Gemara says, Loim Omar Benosi Shekain Ein Mevi Chataso Misha Avar. The thing is, in from a different perspective, the Nasi is actually more limited than the Kohen Mashiach, because the Nasi, if he sins when he's no longer king, he does not bring his Sa'ir Nasi, whereas the Kohen Gadol, when he sins, when he's no longer Kohen Gadol, after he's already been Kohen Gadol, he does still bring his par Yom, his par Kohen Mashiach, and therefore, so again, so lo imamar b'nasi sheken ein maybe chatasu mishavar tomar b'mashiach shemaybe chatasu mishavar holu maybe chatasu mishavar yavi ala kodmis tamulomar hamashiach yechta chadik shu mashiach maybe kishu hedget eino maybe. Okay, that was a mouthful. I just read a whole bunch, but the point being that is why we need the pasuk of imakoyin Mashiach yechta to say that the Kohen Gadol brings the par Kohen Mashiach only once he's the Kohen Mashiach, only once he's the Kohen Gadol, but not from prior, because otherwise, right, without the pasuk, I could have said that while the Nasi does not bring the Sa'ir Nasi for prior averos, I could argue that the Kohen Gadol would bring the par Kohen Mashiach for prior averos, since, after all, he brings the par Kohen Mashiach even post being Kohen Gadol, even when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, he still brings a par Kohen Mashiach. So I might think that just like when he sins when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, he brings a par Kohen Mashiach. Maybe when even prior to being Kohen Gadol, he would bring par Kohen Mashiach, if he sinned and then became Kohen Mashiach. Therefore, we need the pasuk to say that he only brings the par Kohen Mashiach if he sins once he's already Kohen Mashiach. And now, V'tanya nami gabe nasi ki gavna, and we have a similar discussion, so to speak, I guess you could say, by a Nasi, which is Asher Nasi Yechta Prat Lekodmis. It says when the Nasi, when the king sins to the exclusion of prior sins, Valo Denu. But can't we just use our noggins? Why do we need a pasuk? Ma Moshiach Shemevi Cheto Mishe Ovar Einu Mevi Ala Kodmis. If when it comes to a par Kohen Mashiach, that a Kohen Gadol brings his par Kohen Mashiach, even when he's no longer Kohen Gadol, and yet he doesn't bring a par Kohen Mashiach for prior averos. Well then, Nasi she'ein mevi chatos misha avar, a king who doesn't bring his Sa'ir Nasi after he's king, when he's no longer king, well then, Eino din shelo yavi ala kodmo, certainly then he should not be bringing the Sa'ir Nasi for prior averos. But ma l'mashiach shekein ein mevi b'shigigas ma'ase. Tomar b'nasi shemaybe b'shigigas ma'ase. But I could argue that it makes sense that the Kohen Gadol does not bring the par Kohen Mashiach for prior averos, since after all, he only brings the par Kohen Mashiach bichlal in a more limited capacity, that it's only for helim dover and shigas ma'ase, not for shigas ma'ase alone. Maybe where am I? Maybe b'shigas ma'ase. Tomar b'nasi shemaybe b'shigas ma'ase. Maybe b'shigas ma'ase yavi ala kodmis. But a king brings the Sa'ir Nasi even for shigas ma'ase, even without the helim dover, and therefore maybe I'll say that he should also bring for kodmis. Tamalo masher nasi yechta. Therefore, the pasuk says when the king sins, not if he had sinned prior to being king. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, okay, that a king sins, Yochol Gezerah, or when it says Asher what? Asher Nasi Yechta, that the king will sin. You tell me that the king is going to sin? There's no chance that he's not. The king is going to sin. Why are we saying the king is going to sin? Hopefully he won't sin. Tamalomer, im hakohen HaMashiach yechta. Well, by the par Kohen Mashiach, it says im hakohen HaMashiach yechta, if the Kohen Gadol sins, malalan lichshe yechta, avkan lichshe yechta. So just like by the king, it's in the event that he sins. No, just like by the Kohen Gadol, it's in the event that he sins. So also by the king, it's in the event that he sins. We said, Yachol Gezerah, is it possible that it's a Gezerah, it's a decree that the king will sin? What's the Havamina? Like, where do we have a precedent of like a guarantee that somebody's going to sin, that like we would assume that the pasuk is saying that the king is going to sin? Amri in, they say, well, Taka, I will show you a precedent. Ashkechon dichsiv, v'nasati nega tsaras beveis eretz achuzaschem. That the pasuk says, I will place an affliction of tsaras in the house, in the land of your achuzah. What's achuzah? Like achuzing. Be'eretz achuzasim. I feel like it's like to the land of your, like, I don't even know. Whatever, Eretz Yisrael. B'sori lo'en shenegoyim b'amalem divrei Rebuda. Rebuda says it is an announcement to them. It is a proclamation that they are going to get tsaras. V'nasati neged tsaras. You're going to get tsaras in your houses. That's Rebuda's opinion. Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon prat l'nige onsin, that v'nasati neged tsaras means that it happens on its own, not that like something will make it happen. Okay. For example, like hocus pocus or demons. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that by tsaras, there's a proclamation that you're gonna get tsaras. So Chanami, so also we could say that by the king, Ema Gezerah, that it is a decree, it's a proclamation, the king will sin. Therefore it says im. That is why by the Kohen Gadol it says im, if. So also by the king it's if he sins. So the Reb Shimon nigei onsin milo mitamu. Now Reb Shimon had said, to the exclusion of onsin, that if the tsaras comes from like a demon or something, so then it would not be valid tsaras. But is that really true? Right? Nigei onsin milo mitamu. What? Ones by nigaim is not tsaras. Vatanim, we learned by so odum ki yiyeh, that when it says by tsaras, odum ki yiyeh, that the Torah says when a person will get tsaras. What if a person already had tsaras from before the Torah saying that what? Who is this? I assume, is this like Moshe speaking maybe? So like Adam Kiyeh, Moshe is telling the Bnei Yisrael, I'd have to look it up, but like whether it's Hashem or Moshe, right? Well, probably, Hashem they wouldn't have heard this directly from Hashem. But anyways, let's say it's Moshe telling the Bnei Yisrael, and he says to everybody, when a person will get tsaras. What if a person raises his hand and says, I already had tsaras? Am I tamei? So we say, minadibur ve'elach. No, only people who got tsaras from that announcement, from the time that mitzvah was taught and onwards. V'alo dinhu. We say, wait, why do I need to learn that out from the pasuk? Let me use my noggin. Tamei b'zav, v'tamei b'negayim. There's tuma by a zav, and there's tuma by tsaras people. Ma zav minadibur ve'elach. Just like by zavs, it's only people who saw ziva after the mitzvah was taught. So also we'll say, using our noggins, that tsaras would only be tummy from the time that this mitzvah was taught to the Bnei Yisrael, not if anybody had tsaras prior. So that's the Gemara's kasha. They say, wait a second, you can't learn out mitzora, you can't learn out tsaras from zav, because zav is not tamei be'ones. What's ones by zav? I don't know. Somehow he what does it actually say? Kigon ayidei nefila, if he fell. Oh wait, wait, but what's zav by? I don't know. What's like a zav? I don't remember. I think maybe it comes up in Masechta Nida. Okay, but some kind of ones by zav. Anyways, so ones by zav would not be a zav, and yet ones by tsaras would be tsaras. And therefore, we can't learn out Saras from Zav. So Talmud Omer, Adam Kiyiyah min adibar ve'elech. That's what we need the pasuk to say. Adam Kiyiyah by Saras to say it's from the time that the mitzvah was taught and moving forward. So we saw in that price that we said you can't learn out Saras. You cannot learn out Saras from Zav because Saras is even be'ones. So why does Reb Shimon say that Saras is not be'ones? So Rave Omer says Rave Prat Lenige Ruchis. So Rava says that when Reb Shimon says there's no tsaras ba'onis, it's talking about if tsaras came from like spirits, spiritual tsaras. Rav Papa Omer Prat Lenige Kshofen says Rav Papa, if the tsaras came from hocus pocus, it would not be tsaras. Okay, but if you fell or something like that and got tsaras that way, that would be Saras. Then Rabbanan the rabbis thought, Asher Nosi Yechto Prat L'Cholet. Okay, if a king sins, so he brings the Sa'ir Nosi to the exclusion of a Cholet. If he gets sick, Mishum Dava Cholet, Dava Cholet, Idchile. You say what? Just because he's sick, is he not a king anymore? When he gets sick, he's no longer the king. Amravavdimi Bar Choma Prat L'Nosi She Nitztareya. Well, if he gets Saras, and we saw this, I believe we saw this on yesterday's Daf. Yes, we did. That if a king gets tsaras, then he's no longer going to be king. Shenemar Zapot says, "Vayinaga Hashem es hamelech," that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave tsaras to, I believe, Uziyahu. Vayim mitzora ad yom moso, and he was a mitzora until the day that he died. Vayeshev bebeis hachofshis v'yosam ben hamelech al abayis, and he was in the beis hachofshis. He was no longer the king anymore. And now says the Gemara, I believe this is a kind of a tangential thing, says the Gemara, and maybe this is kind of like the segue now into the interesting agadata section, that while he was, so now he was a Metzora, he was no longer the king. And he says he was in the free house, in the Beis HaChavshis, implying that while he was king, he was not free, he was a servant while he was king. That's exactly right. A public servant. That's exactly right. Yoshua, as illustrated in the following story with Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, Avu Azli Besfinta. They were traveling on a boat. Ba'adei Rabbi Gamliel have a pita. Ba'adei Rabbi Yeshua have a pita v'sulta. Rabbi Gamliel brought with him bread to eat. Rabbi Yeshua brought not just bread, but also flour to make more bread. Shlim pita de Rabbi Gamliel, samach asulte de Rabbi Yeshua, and sure enough, the journey took longer than expected. Rabbi Gamliel ran out of his bread, and he and Rabbi Yeshua shared the flour with Rabbi Gamliel so that they could, so Rabbi Gamliel would have bread to eat. Amalei mihava yodas the havalon ikuvu kulei, says Rabbi Gamliel to Rabbi Yeshua, how did you know that we would be stuck at sea for longer, that you knew to bring flour? The Isis so sulta that you knew to bring flour. Amalei, Rabbi Yeshua responded, Kol chavecha l'shivim shana ola umasa es hasaponim. There is a star that every 70 years confuses the sailors and they get lost at sea. And I said, well, what if that star comes out on our voyage and we will be stuck at sea for a while? So therefore I brought extra flour. So Amalei kokach biyodcho v'ta'ola b'svino, and says Rabbi Gamliel to Rabbi Yeshua, wow, you are so wise, you're so smart, you have so much knowledge, and yet you need to be traveling on boats in order to go and do business in far off places. Like kilu chaval, kilu, wow, it's so sad that a person of your stature, Rabbi Yeshua, you can't just be learning in the Beis HaMedrash, you have to be going out on boats in order to scrape together a living. Which is not interesting, because the Gemara in Brachos, I believe, had said that Rabbi Yeshua was a blacksmith. But anyways, Amalei, to which Rabbi Yeshua responded, Ad she'ata tameo olai, don't worry about me so much. Tameo shnei talmidim sheyesh lecha bayabosha. Rabbi Yeshua says to Rabbi Gamliel, look, Rabbi Gamliel, don't worry about me so much. You have two students, Rabbi Elazar Chisma, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgado. Sheyodin l'shar kama tipis yesh bayom. They are so wise, they could tell you how many drops there are in the sea. Ve'en lehem pas lechov lo beged lo bosh. And yet, they don't have a morsel of bread to eat, nor a garment to wear. Now, so Rabbi Gamliel took to heart what Rabbi Yeshua told him, and Rabbi Gamliel was thinking, okay, let me appoint Rabbi Elazar Chisma and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada to positions of authority. In that way, they will be appointed to positions of authority, and from that they will be able to put together a living, they'll have jobs to do, etc. I assume that's Baki. Whatever it is, they'll be in a fancier position, and that will correspond with opportunities for parnasa. So when Rabbi Gamliel arrived back on shore, Shalach Laim, he sent to Rabbi Elazar Chisma and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, v'lo bo, but they didn't come. Chazav Shalach uvo, so he sent for them Nachamo a second time, and this time they came. And he says to them, look, I know why you didn't come the first time, because you assumed that I was going to be giving you kavod, putting you in a place of authority, and you didn't want the kavod. So let me let you in on a secret. Rabbi Elazar Chisma and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, Avdus anunos enachem. I'm not giving you authority and power and fame, and you're going to be a servant. It's servitude. Shenemar vaydabu elav lemor imayom tia eved laomazeh. This is a passage by Rehoboam, the son of King Solomon, that when Rehoboam became the king, his counsel was that what does it say? He says, they counseled him, Im hayom tia eved laomazeh, if you will be a servant to this nation and do what is best for them, well, then you will succeed. So the point being from this story that being a king, having authority, is a position of servitude, is a position of avdos, which is why by Uziyahu it said that when he got saras and he was no longer the king, he was bebeis hachofshis, he was now free. He didn't have to deal with all the pressures of public servitude, as was also demonstrated by the story with Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar Chisma, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada, and also by Rehoboam ben Shloima. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught Asher Nosi Yechta. Very interesting drash. Asher is like Ashrei, fortunate, praiseworthy. Nosi Yechta. Amr Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ashrei Hador, praiseworthy is the generation, fortunate is the generation. Shanosi Shelo Mevi Korban al Shigagoso, that the king has the humility and the self-awareness to bring a korban for his mistakes. Himnosi Shelo Mevi Korban Tzarech Atalomar Mauhejet, and certainly if the king has the humility, I don't know if the word is humility, but if the king is setting the precedent that when he needs to bring a korban, he brings a korban, so then certainly you don't have to ask about what the hedjotis are doing in that generation. It's a good generation. And certainly if the king is bringing a korban for his mistakes, certainly if he intentionally. So where am I? So where am I? Maybe Corbin. Interesting. What does that even mean, Mauzdono? I just really you don't bring korbanos for intentional stuff. Maybe the point is that he's not doing intentional stuff. Interesting. I didn't really think about that. All right, but if he's doing it for his unintentional stuff, certainly, I don't know. There shouldn't be intentional stuff, or if there. Oh, I didn't really think about that. What's Zadon? I don't know. If anybody knows, let me know. I don't. Says. Oh, but it says Rashi. Ma Zadon b'dmio. Klomer im ashigoso margish kolshigin shemargish asdono bechozer b'tshuva. And I'll do tshuva. Okay, says Rashi. I'll do tshuva. Maskifla ravit brei de Rav Elamiata. But 1 second. If we're saying that just because it says Asher Nasiyechta, Asher means Ashrei, fortunate, good times. But it says Rav brei de Rav Elamiata. B'chsiv ve'es Asher. Chotam in HaKodesh Yishalim. It says by Me'ilah. Asher choto min hakodesh yishalim. Uviyaravum ben navot, ksiv, dichsiv be, asher choto va asher echti. Hachinami de ashrei. Hadoru. What are we going to say? Wow, great times. That's bad stuff. Modna. Shani yochel deshani kar b'diburei. So the Gemara says, well, here it's different. The reason why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai makes this drasha specifically by Asher Nasu Yechto, because as we saw earlier in the daf, this is different than all of the other places. For example, right, we said that by Kohen Gadol, it says im. Right, what does Rashi say? I think Rashi points out what we're talking about here, right? The Be'idach Siv, I'm reading Rashi, the Be'idach Siv, im kol adas Yisrael yishgu, im akoyin HaMashiach, im nefesh, v'ochak Siv Asher. No siechta. So vade asher mashma. Right. All the other ones is talking about if they sin, if this happens. But here we're saying asher. So it's to make a drush of ashrei. Fortunate is the generation that has a king like this. Dar Ashrab Nafman Ba'riv Chizdamanta. What does the pasuk mean? Yesh hevel asher naisa la'oretz v'gomer. What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says in Koheles. Yesh. I'm reading the pasuk. Yesh hevel asher naisa la'oretz. There's hevel on the land. Asher tzadikim asher magiel aleim k'maisa rishoyim. V'yesh rishoyim asher magiel aleim k'maisa tzadikim. Hamayti shegam ze hevel. So says the Gemara. What is it supposed to mean? Yesh hevel asher naisa la'oretz v'gomer ashreim la tzadikim shemagia aleim k'maisa rishoyim shel olam haba ba'olam hazeh. That fortunate, praiseworthy are the tzadikim, that what the rishoyim get in the next world, bad stuff, the tzaddikim get in this world. They have yisurin and bad things in this world, so that in the next world they can mamish enjoy. And woe is to the rishoyim shemagia aleim kimaisi tzaddikim shalom haba ba'olam hazeh. Woe is to the rishoyim who they get what the tzaddikim get in the next world, givaldige stuff, but they get it in this world, and next world is not going to be very good for them. Amar Rava says, Rava, atu tzadike iachli tre'alme misanilu. Says Rava, would it be such a bad thing if tzadikim can have it givaldig both in the next world but also in this world as well? Would that be such a bad thing? Amar Rava rather says, Rava, ashreim l'tzadikim. Fortunate, praiseworthy is it for the tzadikim shemagia aleim k'maisa rishoyim she'olam hazeh ba'olam hazeh. How givaldig is it when you can have a tzaddik who, of course, in addition to whatever amazing things he's going to get in the world to come, but even in this world, he can get great things. Just like the Rishayim get great things in this world, he also gets great things in this world, in addition to what he's going to get into the next world. That would be amazing. And now, oy laim the Rishayim, and wow, I really feel bad for a Rasha. Shemagia aleim k'maisei tzadikim shalom hazeh b'olam hazeh. And sheesh, that must be a rough, if you're a Rasha, and you're going to have nothing in the next world, and you also have nothing in this world. That's chaval, right? Usually we say about the Rishayim, in the next world they'll have nothing, but at least they get their reward in this world. That would be rough if you're a Rasha who's going to have bad stuff in the next world, and even in this world you're basically getting like the standard tzaddik experience, i.e. nothing great in this world either. That would be chaval for that Rasha. Rav Puppet, Vavuna B'Div Yeshua, also the comment of Rave. Rav Puppet and Vavuna B'Div Yeshua came to Rave. Amalu, and he said, Rave says to them, Ukmisun masechta plana masechta plan. Have you learned such and such a masechta and such a masechta? Amalein, they said, we have. I asrisu purta. Have you gotten a little bit wealthy? Amalein, they says, yes, we have a bit of wealth. Dizabnon ktina da'ara, because we have managed to recently purchase a little bit of property that is marviach, that is successful and makes money. So we've learned, we've acquired, we've accumulated a bit of wealth. Karialayu, and Rava said about them, Ashreim letzadikim, fortunate, praiseworthy is the tzadikim, shemagia aleim kimaisa rishoyim ba'olam hazeh, that these tzadikim, who of course in the next world will get great treatment, but even in this world, they get what the rishoyim generally get in this world, which is good stuff, and good stuff in this world. Fortunate are the tzaddikim who, in addition to whatever they're going to get in the next world, they also have it good in this world as well. Amar Rav bar Bachana, Amar Reb Yochanan. What does the pasuk mean? Ki yesharim darech Hashem v'tzadikim yelchu bam ufoshim yikashlu bam. That straight are the ways of God. The righteous walk in them, and the sinners fail in them. It is a parable to two individuals. Both individuals roasted their korban pesach. One of them ate his korban pesach to be mekayim, the mitzvah of korban pesach. The other one ate the korban pesach as dessert. So, wow, more meat, and he just shoves it down the hatch. So you have these two people who did the same exact experience, and yet the one who did this experience l'shem mitzvah, that's tzadikim yelchubam. And the one who did the same thing, they both ate the korban pesach, but this one ate it as a glutton. Well, that's ufoshim yikashlubam. Wait, what's this singing that I'm hearing outside? Just listening? I think that they're just singing because it's right before Shabbos. Shabbos starts soon. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not too late. I think hopefully I'll be able to finish on time, which is great. But anyways, yeah, Shabbos is starting soon. Anyways, so the point is you can have two people doing the same exact experience, and one person is tzadikim yelchubam, whereas the other person is doing the same thing, but it's ufoshim yikashlu bam. Amarle Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says, wait a second, that's a little bit extreme. Rasha karisle, you're calling this guy a Rasha because he's eating the korban pesach, not to your liking. I agree. It's not ideal to eat the korban pesach as a glutton, but at the same time, he's eating the korban pesach over here. It's a mitzvah. Pesach miloka acher. What is he not eating korban pesach? I mean, I don't want to talk about what bad things he could be doing. This is a good thing to eat korban pesach. You don't lie. It sounds like we're like in a place of, it's like we're in a good place if we could start being picky about how somebody's eating korban pesach. So Rish Lakish wasn't super excited to call this person poshim yikashlubam. So rather, Rish Lakish says it is a parable to two people. You have one guy who's in his house with his wife and his sister. You have another guy who's in his house with his wife and his sister. And both of these individuals went to sleep at night. And for one of them, I assume the point is he had beer with his wife. That's good. The other one ended up having beer with his sister, not intentionally, but this is what happened. So the one who managed to sleep with his wife, which is the right thing, so that's tzadikim yelchubam. The one who somehow ended up sleeping with his sister, so that's going to be poshim yikashlu bam b'midami. But one second, that is not a good parable. We're talking about two people doing the same exact activity. Right, two people eating korban pesach. One of them is tzadikim yelchubam, the other one is poshim yikashlubam, for example. Here it's two different things. One person slept with his wife, one person slept with his sister. It's two different. It's not like they're doing the same thing. It's not like they're both sleeping with the same person. Rather, it's like Lot and his two daughters when he slept with them. When they slept with their fathers because they thought that the world was being destroyed and that they needed to populate it, and they did it l'shem mitzvah. But he, right, so while they were doing it l'shem mitzvah, he was involved in the same activity as they were. He was doing it together with them, and yet but his intention was for avera, and therefore, I guess, to sleep with his daughter, not ideal, and so therefore that was poshim yikashlubam. So in the same bia, his daughters were tzadikim yelchubam, and he was ufoshim yikashlubam v'dilma hunam l'shem mitzvah u'mechavin. But one second, how do you know? Maybe Lot also was l'shem mitzvah, had positive intentions. Rabbi Yochanan Says Rabbi Yochanan, Kol ha-pasuk hazeh l'shem avera nemer. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the entire following pasuk by Lot is negative. I'll read the whole pasuk first, and then I'll read what the Gemara says about it. So I'm reading now the whole pasuk outside. Vayisa Lot es eino vayar es kol ha-kikar yarden ki chula mashke lifnei shachis Hashem esodom v'samor kigan Hashem keretz mitzrayim bo'ach hatzor. This was when Lot looked up and he saw Sodom and he says, wow, that looks like a gavaldiga place. So that entire pasuk was negative. Vayisa Lot, when it says Vayisa Lot, that's like Vatiso Eishes Adonavas Enel. That's like by Eishes Potiphar, which was bad. Es Einov, Vayom Shimshon v'gomer Osa Kachli ki Yoshua be'enoi. That's like when Shimon said, I assume by Delilah, I didn't actually look it up, that I'm going to take her because she's good in my eyes. Vayar, and that's like Vayar Osa Shchem ben Chomer, when Shchem saw Dina. Es kol Kikar Yarden, ki ba'ad isha zona ad Kikar lechem. Ki chulo mashke, elcha achre me'ahovai, nosne lachmi, umeimai, samri ufishti, shamni v'shikuyoi. So all these things were kind of negative. V'ha meinis onis. But now the Gemara says, wait, but why are we blaming Lot? He was kind of forced into it, right? His two daughters said, hey, we'll get our father drunk and we'll sleep with him. What did he do wrong? Tan mishum b'yesi b'rebchoni lo menokod al vav shebekuma. Why in the word bekuma? Is the vav dotted? Shebekuma shebechira lo ma'loch shebeshichba lo yada. Okay, so by the older one, when he slept with the older one, while sure, initially he was right when at night he didn't know, but aval bikuma yada, he knew what happened when he woke up the next morning. Umay avle lemeber. Okay, but what should he have done? My da'ava, whatever happened the night before. Nafgemina telefanya achrino lo yiboy lemishte. Yeah, but once he knew what happened the night before, the following night he shouldn't have gotten fresh naked and slept with his other daughter. So therefore, that's why he was ufoshim mikashlu bum. There is Rabba Dashan. Madik said, what is supposed to mean? Ach nifsha mikiryas oz umidyonim pevriach armon. Ach nifsha mikiryas oz that Lot sheperish mei Avram. Okay, that is a reference to Lot, who distanced himself, separated himself from Avram Avinu. Midyonim kivriach armon shehitel midyonim, that he made like tension ben Yisrael Ammon, between Israel and Ammon, who came from the younger daughter. Shene'amar lo yavo Ammoni u'Moabi bikal Hashem. Okay. Dorash Ravet v'Temer Yitzchak Ma'idich l'saiva yiga vakesh nifrod, for taiva, for lust, a person will want to separate b'chol tushia yis gala. I think for what? All wisdom, something bad or something. The Saiba Yavakish Nifrod Zelot Sheperish Shenifrod me Abraham. That's Lot who separated himself from Abraham. B'chosushia Yizgala Shenizgala Klono Vatiknesias Vatimijoshes, that his disgrace was revealed in the study halls and synagogues. It's not. They were in the Mishnah. Ammoni Moavi Asurin Isser Olam, that Ammon and Moab are usher forever to join the Kahal. Tamar zinsa v'Zimri zina. Tamar slept with Yehuda, and Zimri slept with Cosbi. Tamar zansa yotzu u'mena melachim nevim, and yet Tamar, from her relationship, came prophets and kings. Zimri zina naflu kam rivavos Yisrael, and when Zimri slept with Cosbi, several myriads of Israel died. Gadol Avera Lishma. An Avera with the right intentions is greater mitzvah shelo lishma than a mitzvah shelo lishma. Shenemar Tevorach Minoshim Yoel Eishes Chaver Akeni. Minoshim Ba'oil Tevorach. That Yoel, who killed Sisera, she is blessed from the women more so than the women in the tent. Man Ninu. Who are the women in the tent? Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Valeh. So we see that Leah, that Yoel, who had beer with Sisera, that was an Avera Lishma, That was better even from Sarif Korach and Leah. Ini, is that so? That an Avera Lishma is greater than a mitzvah Shalol Lishma? What about the famous line, the famous statement from Rav Yehuda Marab, that a person should always be osik b'Torah mitzvahs even if it's Shalol Lishma? Because Shemitoch Shalol Lishma Ba'al Lishma, you'll get to a place of Lishma. Just get started. So why are we speaking negatively about mitzvah Shalol Lishma? Mitzvah Shalol Lishma are also important because Mitoch Shalol Lishma Ba'al Lishma. Say ki mitzvah Shalol Lishma. Okay, say that a Avera Shalol Lishma is as good as a mitzvah Shalol Lishma. An Avera Lishma is as good as a mitzvah Shalol Lishma. Amr B'Yochanan says Rabbi Yochanan Sheva Be'ilos Baal Oso Rasha Ba'osa Shah, that Sisera had Bia 7 times with Yoel, Shenemar, Bein Raglea, Korah, Nofal, Shochab, V'Gomer. It says like 7 different Lashonis in that verse. Okay. But isn't she? What didn't Yoel get benefit from the Avera? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shimon ben Yochai afilu tovasam shorishayim ra'i etzel tzadikim. Even the good stuff by Rishaim is bad by the tzadikim. Sisera was a Rasha, Yoel was a tzadikis. Amar Yehuda Marav lolam yasok adam b'Torah mitzvos afilu shalol lishma shemitoch shalol lishma ba'al lishma. We had said a few minutes ago, quoted for Yehuda Marav, that a person should be osik mitzvah shalol lishma shemitoch shalol lishma ba'al lishma shebeschar men beis korbanos sheikri balak harashe. That Balak HaRasha offered 42 korbanos with Bilam, Zacha v'yatza samimenu Rus. And who came from Balak? Rus. The Rabbi Yosef B'Chanina Rus, ben b'no shel Eglin, ben b'no shel Balak, Melech Moav. So the korbanos, the bad korbanos, Shalol Lishma korbanos of Balak, well, from him came Rus. How do we know that the Rebbeinu Shalom pays attention even to small little words? From here, the ilu bechira dekari Moav Amle Rachmana Lemoshe al Totzar es Moav al Tizkar bam Milchama, that the older daughter of Lot called her child Moav, from my father, Ke'ilu. So that was not a very nice thing to say, kind of calling him based on the fact that she slept with her father. So because of that, what does Moshe Rabbeinu say about Moab? Al Tatzar as Moab, Bal Tizkar Bam Milchama. Milchama hu delo, Hatzauri Tsa'arinu. So Moshe says, don't start a war with Moab, but you can have little, I guess, maybe skirmishes or other kind of negative interactions with them, but not a war. But the younger daughter, who didn't say Moav from my father, but Ben Ami, the son of my nation. Omar Lu, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Al Titzurim Bal Tizgarbam Klal. Don't even harass them at all. Don't do anything. Leave them alone. Amr B'chia Bar Oven Amr B'shua Ben Korcha. The Olam Yakdim Adam L'Dvar Mitzvah. A person should be. It should be, what's the word? I don't know what the word I'm thinking of is, but Zara's person should be excited and go ahead for mitzvahs. Because of the one night that the older daughter preceded the younger daughter, she merited to be part of the kingship 4 generations before her sister. Because what does Rashi say? Because Oved Yishai David Shloima was from the older daughter of Ilu Tzeira, V'havi B'Yisrael Ad Rechavam ben Shloima. She only got into the royal lineage by Solomon's son Rechavam. But the first daughter was already in the lineage 4 generations earlier. That was Daf Yud of Masechta Horayos. We discussed Kohen gadols and kings who are no longer serving. Okay, so if you have a Kohen gadol or a king who are no longer serving. So when it comes to a Kohen gadol, So he still offers his par Kohen Mashiach. Whether he sinned while still the Kohen Gadol or afterwards, doesn't matter. He will still bring his par Kohen Mashiach. Whereas when it comes to the king, if he sins while still king, he'll offer the Sar Nasr even though he's not currently the king. But if he sins when he's no longer the king, so then he just brings a regular Korban Chatas. Then we got to the next Mishnah, which had already come up before in Masechta Horayos, Kohen Gadols and kings who are not yet serving. So if they sinned and then afterwards were appointed to the positions, but they hadn't yet offered their korbanos, according to Chacham, they offer a korban chatas like they were chayav before they were appointed. Reb Shimon says if there was knowledge beforehand, then they bring a korban chatas. But if they only realized their sin once they were already king or Kohen Gadol, says Reb Shimon, they would bring no korban at all. And then we got to some interesting agadata. And I think, so that was kind of some interesting stuff. And that was Daf Yud of Masechta Horayos. I will see you tomorrow for Daf Yud Aleph. Have a good one. Peace out.